Everyone, I think we got through the final lap of our introduction course, right? Look, we say that it is an introduction course, but did you realize how much ground we covered? Think about when you started this course, right? There is a chance that you started this course maybe not even knowing too much about C, or kind of really dissecting the idea of CISC versus RISC architecture, dissecting and programming using a little bit of MIPS assembly. Of course, we are not masters or experts in MIPS assembly programming, but at least so we understand what's going on, right? How do we go and actually poke the values and we send instructions and packets to the GPU? How do we send packets and ask for the CD subsystem, right? And we use the BIOS to access the CD. So there's so many knowledge that we had to touch and cover. And in the middle of our lectures, I had all those little articles that explain a little bit of music, sound theory. We have to speak about CD subsystem, programming the CD, red book, white book, yellow book. We have all these different, generation of consoles that actually use CD players, right? And we have CD-ROMs that encode the media of the files. Not even mentioning the whole primitives, ordering tables. There's so much that we cover. I'm saying that this is an introduction course, and you probably saw that it is not as optimal as it could be, right? If you look at the original source code of Wipeout, the developers, they decided to encode a lot of things using assembly, MIPS assembly, so you actually have some source code using assembler to actually go and render the primitives, go and render the tracks, subdivide the quads of the track. So all those things that are actually hot code, right, that are being called several times per second, they actually went the MIPS way and they are actually encoding things with MIPS assembly. So it is kind of not a surprise for me that we didn't get as performance as we could out of our toy project. But look, I'm happy that we at least cover everything. We touched all of these details for an introduction course, right? For something that, our first contact with the world of the PlayStation programming. I don't know, I'm happy with this stage of what we got. I think we covered a lot of things, right? Camera movement, the look at transformation, quads, triangles, Gora shaded textures was a big chapter as well. So yeah, this is no small achievement. Kudos to you if you got to the end, right? Not many people, I have to be honest, not many people have this knowledge, and not many people get to the end of the course, right? Most people don't even start the course, but to get to the end of this, 40-ish hours of course, it is super huge achievement. So kudos to you, right? Kudos to us. And just to talk a little bit about the next steps, there are a couple of things that I think we should talk about in terms of, well, there are several rooms for improvement in our game, of course, right? You probably noticed that. Just to give you a couple of examples, I think some low-hanging fruits that you could try to implement in this project right here. We have things like, we are not actually including any sprites in our implementation right now, right? So we are not really loading the sprites and displaying those sprites, right? Those billboard sprites in the scene objects. You have trees, you have some different panels, so there are sprites that you can load in the scene objects itself. We are not doing that. We could do that. We also could, there are different techniques of breaking the subdivision of the polygon, so we don't have those T-junction artifacts as well. So we could also take a look into that and do some smart way of subdividing the polygons right now, which we didn't do, right? We're just basically dividing everything in half and living with that, the way that the original Wipeout did. That is one extra thing that I think we could actually implement and improve. Another item that I think we could take a look at is the original Wipeout, and actually so many PlayStation games, they have these ideas of lights, right? So you have different lights affecting the way that we color the polygons, the way that we color the primitives, and we also can take a look in the way that the GTE computes that light angle, right? How do we actually pronounce the light intensity? The GTE has some comments to help with that as well. Looks at the normal of the face, computes the light intensity based on that normal. So lighting is something that we could also take a look at that and, try to optimize a couple of things, use lighting. All these lights, they actually come from the file, so you actually load those lights at a certain position, so you have the direction of the lights. Skybox is something that we didn't look at, right? Because the original game, one super cool thing is that Skybox that is loaded. So you have this kind of sense that you are inside this environment, right? You have the sky, you have these mountains on the background. So Skybox is something that we didn't do. It's kind of easy actually to implement. Skybox is not that hard. So you see, there are several things that we didn't implement that are kind of just waiting there to be implemented, right? One final thing that I want to mention is junctions, right? So do you see how we have sometimes in different tracks, you have a track and then that track divides? That is what I call a junction, right? So we are not actually dealing with the junctions in our implementation. It should be as simple as going, right? Looking at that linked list, looking at the junctions, the different pointers, and just take into account in our code that division, that fork of the junction, and then as we enter, as we connect as well, is basically just handling the linked list differently and taking into account those different pointers that point to different sections, right? So junctions is something that also you could take a look at. You see, several things. And this is just speaking about our toy project, right? If you go into a different game or different elements, you have to deal with animations, or you have to talk about these different file formats that encode animation of characters. You have these ideas of different hierarchies of matrices inside the animation, right? So you have a parent, a child that has that relative motion, Crash Bandicoot, and all these games that try to approach animation from a different perspective, right? Actually very smart, but animation is something that you could take a look at. So you see, there's a lot of room for us to evolve and explore and research. This is just the tip of the iceberg, right? This is a cliche to say that, but this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to PlayStation programming. This is just us taking the first look at what PlayStation programming is, all right? From my side, all I want to say is, look, I know that to get people's attention nowadays is super hard, and all I have to say is, if you trusted us with your time and your attention and your investment, all I want to say is like, look, thank you so much for putting the trust in us here at the school. It is a passion of mine, right, to deal with this, not just gaming or game consoles, but to talk to you about technology, going back in time and looking at this evolution for us to really understand why things evolved the way that they did, right? Now that you went back to 1993, 1994, you saw the current state of affairs and you understand why CD-ROM was so useful, right, and so popular, and why it kind of became this kind of de facto, from the late 90s, it became the de facto way of encoding games and textures and assets. So CD technology, the idea of having these types of memories, right, DMA, taking care of things, sending information via DMA, super important. A RISC, right, RISC taking over, right, all this, the MIPS assembly, RISC architecture taking over, the pipeline nature of that RISC architecture. I think, and also super important, moving into using a high-level programming language to actually be productive, right? We can use a high-level programming language now. The compilers, they do the job for us and they spit out assembly code, they spit out machine instructions. So we are entering a phase where we really don't have to squeeze everything using assembly language. We can take advantage of a high-level language compiler. In our case, it was C, and you will see then in the future, C++ became the industry standard, but yeah, that's the idea, right? I think, again, just making a point that, do you see how important it is for us to stop and look at the past? I think looking at the past, it probably helped you connect a lot of dots in terms of even what we do today, right? All these ARM processors that are taking over the industry, right? M1, M2, everything based on ARM, everything based on now RISC-V. So all these things I think are important for us to understand as programmers, right? As computer programmers, people that know about computers and mathematics and exact sciences. It is very important for us to understand why these things happen the way that they did. And look, there's nothing more fun than going back to the PlayStation era and learning about all these things, right? I hope you agree with me. So once again, I think I'm done. I think this is it, right? I think we are concluding our part right here. Thank you so much, and hopefully I'll see you in the future for different game consoles or different lectures that I have right here. I love this. This is what I live for. So hopefully I'll see you soon in another one of our courses. See you soon. Have a great one. Bye-bye.